I've been an educator for over 20 years, and part of that learning lesson is the acronyms that I've earned behind my name do not make me. I'm Native first. And first and foremost, I'm acknowledging all the teachings of my community. And when I think of place-based education, when you become of age, you often learn that you're always a student. And sometimes those mistakes you make is when you acknowledge yourself as a non-student. So first and foremost, I'm a student, so I just want to put that out there. And when I think of place-based education, I think of all the things that I had access to as a kid. And you know, when you're a kid, you're always going, oh, I can't wait till I leave, right? And I jumped into Eurocentric institutions feeling very isolated. And it definitely resonates to some of the context with Auntie Laura Ballou talks about the importance of having programs in which we feel that there are safe spaces. So just to tell a little bit story about myself, although I'm a visitor to the Pacific Northwest, my knowledges, the knowledge systems that I come from are from Northeastern North Carolina. My knowledges also come from the River Valley region, which is part of the Appalachian Territory of Virginia, West Virginia. So my family names are Carroll and Baker on the Eastern Bay and Cherokee side. And for the Saponi side, I could go down a long list of names, but I'll stop there. Montgomery is my former spouse's name, so I just want to make sure I'm acknowledging the names in which I come from, because that's where my place-based knowledge comes from. I grew up in a small community where everyone had a farm, and my knowledge just came from being interconnected. My identities are definitely connected to red clay. My memories are growing red clay balls, drying my hands on my jeans, and like, oh, this stuff is permanently dyed forever. And hopping to the fields of biology and plant pathology, I realized that Eurocentric knowledge really could not touch the knowledge that I had learned in my community and how I navigated spaces. And so when I think of place-based knowledges, I'm often questioning, asking myself in these different types of spaces that I navigate as a forever student is, what is sustainable education? We know that we've heard a lot of now, since in the state of Washington, it talks about the since time immemorial curricula, that it's now mandated. That is included to have a true representative history of Indigenous peoples of the Pacific Northwest in their curricula, particularly in the state of Washington. I often ask, who's telling the narrative? How is a narrative being told? And who's really, really unpacking what it means to be an Indigenous person in the Pacific Northwest? And so that's what keeps bringing me to that question. But prior to coming here, my place-based education is also navigating learning from other communities. And I just came back from a climate conference working with Indigenous peoples in and outside of the United States. And my mentor, who I also like to acknowledge for pushing me to continue my education, is Dr. Daniel Wildcat, who is also a mentee of Vine Deloria Jr. And so this is my favorite quote of Wildcat, and if you ask him where he got it from, he'd go, I'll tell you later. And you know, a couple of years later, I still don't know. But anyway, so his favorite quote, which also resonates with me when I'm in these learning spaces like today, he says, "Wisdom resides in the hearts and minds of those that see the beauty around the ugliness in the world." And so when we talk about place-based education, we must also acknowledge that there's a lot of historical trauma that comes with interconnectedness, identity with curricula. We also had to acknowledge that when we ask non-Indigenous peoples to be a part of the curricular planning, to be a part of our learning spaces, our knowledge is generational, and it's not something that you can just learn in a textbook. And it's not something that you can just learn in a year's time. It's actually those interconnection, those intergenerational connectedness. And one of the things that I always ask myself as a Southern gal in the Pacific Northwest, who misses squeezing my toes in red clay from time to time and watching, how many of you have ever seen fireflies? Right, that's like Christmas at night. And I'm often wondering, what does that mean to be in a different location? And so when I think of that red clay and those beautiful fireflies and those willow oaks that were my babysitters growing up, I have to humble myself and realize that Eurocentric knowledge in regards to science is quite young in regards to our knowledges. Our knowledges are since time immemorial, right? Years and years and years of knowledge. So some of the things I'm constantly unpacking with Daniel Wildcat and Kyle White and my bestie Paulette Blanchard, and we're sitting around thinking about how do we create place-based curricula that identifies these geographical spaces that our identities aren't inherently connected to. And it really is about how do we talk about cultural tenure. And cultural tenure, it's kind of a weird way to put things into words, but it's like you're in a process as you navigate through your ages, right? Through your different phases of life, like your 20s, your 30s, your 40s. And I'm 46, and I look back now and I go, why didn't anyone tell me all of this before? Like, none of this is, like, I'm on cruise control. And so when I think of place-based curricula, I think of my passion is definitely within tribal colleges who have molded me to be a better educator. I come to the Pacific Northwest from the Institute of American Indian Arts and working in multiple Native communities throughout the United States. But when I think of place-based education, these are the things that resonate with me. Place-based education responds to our community needs. In every geographical location, we have different needs. Some of the catchphrase place-based education is a one-size-fits-all approach, and that doesn't work. So me being from southeastern region of the United States, it's totally different than needs in the Pacific Northwest. Place-based education empowers community. Language is a huge component of that. How do we acknowledge all of our relations? Not just human relations, but all of our relations. It preserves and revitalizes Indigenous cultures, languages, and that big umbrella of Indigenous knowledges. And I think when I was talking to Wildcat, one of the things that I think a lot of people get stuck on is traditional ecological knowledges. And traditional ecological knowledges is just a small facet of that umbrella of Indigenous knowledges. And the fourth point is it acts as an agent for community healing. So how do we heal? How do we move forward? And so being from a small community, northeastern North Carolina, I'm from Hollister, North Carolina. I know all of you have heard of that. You've traveled there quite a bit, and you all know what Hollister is. And so when I saw a lot of the millennials wearing this t-shirt Hollister, I was like, right on. And I wanted to say, you've got the wrong word on it. We call it Hollywood. But what I want to do is just share a story about my community. And it's so powerful to me because you don't realize where you come from until you've been so far away from home. So in 1955, our community created a building. They built a building. Everyone donated their own resources and supplies. And it was to push back on a lot of the racism that people from our community felt attending all the surrounding schools. So about 1958, we had our own tribal school in my community in Hollywood, North Carolina. Tribal population about 4,000. And in 1969, when integration started, they said you had to close our schools because it was against the law. We were not following policy so that we could receive funding. But that's not the end of it. We're quite feisty in our rural area. And I'm honored to say, and I think it's phenomenal, in 2000, we played the system. So I've heard the words consent, revitalization, and we've heard Indigenous governance, but I want to add the word resurgence, right? And in 2000, we opened our charter school. And we opened our first school with 69 students. And it's still going. And one of the most important things we have to think about is the health and well-being of creating armor for our children to leave our communities to prepare for a world that's often not prepared for them. So I'm also going to decolonize that our kids are not prepared. They are very prepared, the world is not prepared for us. And so with that notion, I'm proud to say that we have several students from my community who have gone on to attend it's called the North Carolina School of Math and Science. It's in Durham, North Carolina. And so when you hear of the successes of those communities, learning more about our cultures as our students are teaching them how to be prepared to engage us, I think it's phenomenal. But my place-based education truthfully started when my grandfather said to me, you know, young lady, the best lessons that you will ever learn is taking your socks and shoes off and walking in the dirt. The dirt will remember you. It can't remember you with cobblers on, so when you get home, take them off. And my fondest memories of place-based education is when the more Western, Eurocentric schools would close, I wouldn't have shoes on for the entire summer. I had metal feet. I don't know how we ran across sticker briars and rocks. But in that lesson, I knew how to navigate river rocks. I knew to look for the shade, because shaded areas are where water moccasins thrive. And the biggest lessons were watching my grandfather pick flat rocks out to teach me how to sharpen knives, right? And so when we think of place-based education, I think of those many days. Even now I walk around with no shoes on and I'm learning about my particular environment. But I cannot say anything without saying this. My success comes from Northwest Indian College. Several years ago, I bumped in to a person who's no longer with us at Institute of American Indian Arts. His name was Steve Pavlik. And he said, Michelle, I think you need to move around a bit. And I said to him, I did. I moved from North Carolina to New Mexico, and I was like, no one really understands what I'm saying when I say y'all. You done it, right? I don't know if you know that phrase, but Steve introduced me to the community of Northwest Indian College way before I even decided to come to the Pacific Northwest. And you know how destiny happens, right? When the institution rubs me raw, this is where I come. When I need to be re-energized, this is where I come. And so I just want to say, Pilahak Wado, to this place. It's a sacred place. So here's my moment of place-based education for the Pacific Northwest. I hop in my truck. Yeah, I drive a truck. I talk about climate change, but I'm also a rock climber. If I'm hanging off the side of a mountain one day and you see someone saying, look out, that would be me. My fondest memories of coming to this place is when I travel 405 north, I hit I-5, and when I hit 210, exit 210, there's a different breeze that comes from exit 210. And if you're a novice sailor, that's when you know the knots of the wind gauge have changed, right? And so it's like stargazing, right, on the highway. So I'm going to stop babbling, but I do believe that place-based education I want us to change the narrative to say it's not about preparing our kids for the world. It's about preparing the world for us, because we are indigenous to these lands, and every place you walk is stolen lands from indigenous peoples. And I think our youth need to own that they're here, right? And they're not going anywhere. So, Wado Pilla.